Bree, I'm so excited that you get to join us on an N of one. As you know, we kind of go through your career here. We talk about, your individual experiences as it relates to behavioral science. You have lots of tips to pass on, and I want to hear those about sort of the general practice of behavioral science. But the focus here is really the awesomeness that is you. It's an individual thing because an N of one matters, right? Individual experiences are important, and your story is going to help other people who are going along the journey you're on. So, as always, take me back, Bree Gorman. Take me back. When did you what was young Bree like? What is like child Bree? Would I recognize child Bree as like more or less the lovely, wonderful Bree adult that I know?
I don't know. Yes and no, right? I have all these sort of characteristics of being the oldest child, even though I'm not the oldest, I'm just the oldest girl. So from a really young age, I was like the mother of the family. So I grew up with a single mom who in the early 80s, my parents divorced when I was 3. So like early 80s, my mom has 3 little kids and she's the like early 80s trailblazer, like pantyhose, high heels, shoulder pads, like getting her seat at the table. Right. And so I was the like responsible one at home doing all the things. And like that was my kind of model of like what you do as a woman. You have kids, but you also do all of these things and climb your way to the top. So I'm not doing that. I'm not climbing my way to the top. It took a long time to kind of like tease that apart. But as you know, those characteristics as a child, like I still have just like a strong kind of leadership style in my life and maybe a little bit of like control freak bossiness kind of angle too.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. We don't use the word bossy here on an N of one. You are a strong, empowered, badass woman. And I don't think it's fair to say that you haven't climbed your way to the top. You had this long and wonderful, successful career, although you didn't necessarily start out being like, hey, I'm going to be a behavioral scientist. So like if I asked 12-year-old Bree, like, what are you going to do in the world? What would 12-year-old Bree have predicted that she would be?
So what's funny is when I was 12, all that I knew I wanted to do was go to Notre Dame. That's all I knew.
It's Notre Dame or bust.
And it was like the only school I even visited, only because a friend of mine was visiting and I got to tag along. But I didn't get in. I actually I graduated high school in 99 and that was a particularly like hard year for whatever reason for college admissions for a lot of people, maybe not everyone. But I got rejected like left and right despite having like I was great on paper, right? But something just wasn't happening. So I didn't know what I wanted to do. That's all I knew as a 12-year-old. And in high school, I was, well, even before that, I was always a perfect student, like perfect, straight A's all the time. But I never cared about learning. All I cared about was I got a good grade. And so I would do what it took. I could memorize like no one else. And I regurgitate information and then leave it there. Forget it. As soon as I walk out the door, like I don't have a clue. And it wasn't until a psychology class, this is the first little like hint of my future in high school, that I was like, that was actually really interesting. And I found something that I liked. So I applied to schools under psychology, like a lot of people do.
Wait. I want to drill in on that for a second, though. Like, do you remember what it was about the class that sort of like lit you up? Was there like a study or a thing, or it was just like, oh, humans are fascinating and that we can make science out of them is fascinating?
Just learning about how humans operate and like just basic, I mean, high school basic psychology. It was just interesting. Everything else was like, just standard curriculum. English, I had a really hard time writing back in the day. It took a long time for writing to click for me. I was really good at math because it was so objective. But psychology was just the only thing that like actually was interesting. Everything else was like, did I get an A? Cool.
That's so awesome, right? Because psychology is it's that objective piece, right? It has the science mathy component, but it's sort of a backdoor into humanities, right? It's I think a way for people, sometimes to understand other humans, but through a lens that isn't like poetry or other kinds of ways that maybe some other people come to understand humans.
Yeah.
So you have the psychology class. So when you go off to college, you're thinking Notre Dame psychology. This is like Notre Dame psychology.
Well, I didn't get into Notre Dame, so I actually went for my first semester. I went to a small school in Washington called Puget Sound.
Oh yeah,
And
100%. I'm from the
yeah,
Pacific Northwest, right? I know Puget
oh
Sound.
yeah, that's right. That's right. So I went there. My mom and stepdad got divorced during that process, and it turned into like, you can't go here, it's too expensive. So that, but while I was there, I took another hint towards my path, a sociology class. And that was
Mm.
super interesting. And it was, it was a lot about homeless people in this particular class. And it was so interesting to me because I never thought about like what makes somebody homeless. As an 18-year-old kid, you see a lot of homeless people, but like you don't really think about it, right? So just the fact that like somebody could be working hard, doing well, and their house catches fire, and like then they're homeless because they don't have all those backup plans in place or whatever. So that was super interesting. And I talked to my mom, remember the like up on the ladder, big kind of status, money driven person. And you can't do sociology. You won't make any money with that.
Mm.
Well, I guess I won't like think about that then. Right. So I carry on. Okay, maybe I'll do international business. Maybe I'll do this. Maybe I'll do that. And then I was in architecture for a while. Changed my major a bunch of times. Um,
This is all at University of Kansas. So you've left Puget Sound, you're at
Yep. So I
Kansas
left
now.
Puget Sound. I'm at Kansas now. Sociology was at Puget Sound. So then I go to Kansas halfway through my freshman year. And
Kansas, Kansas, University of Kansas, the notable sociology, psychology, bastion of the Midwest there.
yeah, they actually do have like a lot. They actually have like a good behavioral science type like graduate program now, and like all this stuff that I wasn't aware of because it wasn't even on my radar. As soon as my mom was like dismissive of sociology, I kind of moved on. Like it wasn't even something to
Mm.
explore. And then another class I took while I was, pitter pattering around, like it took me 5 years to graduate, but it wasn't for lack of credits. It's because I just changed my major so many darn times. Took a human geography class. That was super interesting, right? All about humans and how like they've migrated from here to there and how language develops and all these different things, right? But mentioned that and my mom was on this geology like kick. You should be a geologist. What the
And in retrospect, obviously you can see those as connected. In the moment, were you able to sort of go like psychology, sociology, human geography, these three
not at
classes
all.
have lit me up and this is a theme? You were like,
Not at
these
all.
are individual strobe light, bright lights, but it's not really showing you anything yet.
Right. Yep. Not at
Yeah.
the time. Because partially like I was interested in a lot of things and nothing too much. And those were all things that seemed more interesting to me. But I had my parents who were like the people I needed to please, the people I needed to like get their praise and they're okay. And like, yes, because ultimately, in my mind, if I failed, they were going to have to pick me up. So they had to like approve of what I was doing in my mind in order for me to like go forward. So since it wasn't really approved, I just kept moving. And one day, my sophomore year in college, like halfway through sophomore year, I came home from school like so fed up, and I got out the course catalog. At the time, they were printed; it wasn't online, right? Remember that? And I sat at the table and I went down the table of contents, like accounting, no, business, no, like computers, right? I get to graphic design. I was like, I don't know what that is, but that's what I'm going to do, and I'm not changing my major again. Like that's it. And so there we go. So I became a graphic design major, which was very much like a strategic visual communications program, not just like an art school type program, right?
Right. Yes, I
Uh,
mean, so there's a bit more visual communications kind of thing, right? There's a visual element to it. You're learning how to push pixels. You're learning how to do these things. You're learning about psychography, but really, it's about how do you change people's behavior through
yep,
communication, which is, of course, a
yep,
very powerful thing that has echoed into the rest of your career,
yep,
right?
completely. So that was really the beginning. I mean, I didn't have these words, behavioral science, until 2021. Like I did not know those words. I had never heard those words before. But I look back and feel like that's when it started. Like
Mm.
the year 2000-ish was when I started doing behavioral science through design and solving problems through design, right? What are you trying to do? What are you trying to accomplish? What is this outcome? And how do we design to make that happen? Through branding, through visual communications. same sort of process as they go through in like product design or in behavioral science and behavioral design. It's all just like so similar. So that's where I can pinpoint that it like really started. Uh,
Mhm. And
yeah.
did you feel like that was the vernacular that the people around you were also using, or were you like the weirdo, like this is behavior change person and everybody else wants to make things pretty?
So within my world, like my design world, everyone was very much like, we are solving problems. We are like, this is not a make it look pretty type thing.
Got it.
There was a girl in my program also who she was doing a business degree simultaneously. And I was like, well, should I do that? Like, what? And she's like, no, this is so much more valuable. Like, what we are doing here is so much more valuable than that. Like, that's a piece of cake. This is like really, this is important stuff.
This is the stuff.
Yeah. And I was like, okay, cool. We'll just stick with it. And so it wasn't until I started like real world experience that I got really frustrated because it was always, you see these memes all the time in like the design world, make the logo bigger, right? And you're like, no, no, no. Or I don't like it. Like, I don't like that. Like, well, what do you not like? Like, this is the problem we're trying to solve. It's kind of like, a restroom sign in a building. Do you care that it looks pretty or do you care that it like gets you to the restroom, right?
Right.
And so that was that was like my approach and my training in design was very much like we're solving a problem. And in the process, like it usually is visually appealing, but it doesn't matter what the CEO's taste is and if the CEO likes those colors or not. It's like, is it solving the problem and is it working for your intended audience? So that was a big struggle I had, was like being this peon and like fighting that fight all the time.
Yeah. And it is one of the things that we hear consistently in organizations even today, right? There's still a lot of, highest paid person hippo decision making and sort of, the memes and jokes around graphic design have not changed in the last 50 years, I'm pretty sure, right? Because it's still just my individual taste tells me this thing rather than, you know, I often point out to people that the moment we focus objectively on what the behavior is, hey, the point of this chair is to get people to sit, then we unlock science, right? Because then we can say, well, I can run a test that says this is better than that. This sign gets people to the restroom better than that sign gets people to the restroom, and therefore it's a better sign,
Yep.
right? But there
Yep.
is better has to mean something
Yep.
behavioral and measurable and objective. So
Yep.
you're out in the working world and having this conversation over and over and over and over. Uh, Tell me about your first job. Tell me about like moving out into the work. So you graduate and then like tell
Yeah.
me about work going out into the
So
work.
I graduated and naturally I was moving back to San Diego because that's, what else am I going to do? Like my parents were there, my mom and stepdad were there. And, my sister was graduating the same time as me because she was actually very fast in college and knew that she wanted to study history. And so, despite being 2 years younger, we graduated at the same time. So that was fun. And we moved to San Diego and I wanted some of my friends to come along. So I had 4 other friends from my design program that nobody knew what they were doing. So like, sure, I'll go to San Diego with you. So we all like cram into this little house in Point Loma and we're paying a fortune to live there. And yeah, everyone struggled to get a job. Like one friend got a $10 an hour internship. One got a like unpaid internship. One worked at Jamba Juice. And like I actually was the first to get a job, which was like amazing. And it was like out in Rancho Bernardo working for it's just like a marketing consulting company. So the guy who started it was from Belgium and he had worked at McKinsey and KPMG, like big consulting background. So I kind of jumped into the marketing world and learned a lot from him, marketing strategy and research and all the things. And then I taught him all about branding. And so I kind of brought that angle to his company. And that actually, he grew that into what's called Audacity Health now, which is like a big health consult or marketing company. And I moved on from there into healthcare. So that was like my first year out of school. And then I moved to one of our clients and worked there for a while. It was a medical device company, a startup. And
This is ResTech.
yep, yep.
Yeah.
So I was there for like 15 or so years.
Yes, a
All
long time.
things.
But wait, before
Yeah.
I want to talk because you've added something, right? So you're on this sort of what we now know as behavioral science, this sort of visual communication, like how do I use visuals to change behavior kick. Was the health kind of accidental, right? Like I happened to work at a healthcare consulting company, or did
Yep.
the healthcare also have a little bit of a clicky moment for you? Because you have spent a lot of your career in health and health related
Yep.
behavior change.
Yep. So my mom was always in healthcare. So that was kind of like always, I grew up in healthcare. Um, but also because of that was like, I'm never going to be in healthcare. And then I just ended up, it was kind of coincidental. And I had a little bit of seeds placed when my stepmom during college, she had pancreatic cancer and she went on this huge health kick. And I was introduced to like healthy living through carob almonds. So that was my gateway drug into like a healthy lifestyle. So it was kind of like the seed had been planted, but I wasn't really thinking about doing anything in the healthcare space. So it's kind of just coincidental. So
And what made you go to ResTech? Like, you know, you're in consulting, you're liking it, you've got this Belgian guy, yay Belgians,
so
right?
yeah, so the company was sort of starting to struggle a bit, and I felt like most of the work we were getting was all design work, which all fell on me, which was great, but I just like I could feel the struggle and I could feel this sense of like, I'm not sure where this is going. And like, as I already said, it completely bounced back in an amazing direction. But meanwhile, ResTech was one of our clients and they were like, we need somebody to just start marketing. We have no marketing. We need someone internal. And I was like, all right, like, I don't really know how to do that, but I'll buy some books and like, we'll just go for
I
it.
will figure it out.
So I did that. I made that jump and it was fun and really good for me because I like to figure stuff out. I like to kind of like have that if something is not extremely difficult for me to do, I don't feel like I've accomplished something. So that was it wasn't extremely difficult, but it was hard because there was a bunch of stuff I had to learn and I had to figure out how to manage a bunch of trade shows and events and work with key opinion leaders, the subspecialists in medicine, right? Which is it was at the time very intimidating. But I started to meet a lot of people, and there's like ridiculously smart, well-published physician researchers, and actually they're all very nice people. It's fine. I can talk to them. It's okay.
And this is and you were there for like 15 years. So you got your master's while you were at ResTech, right? So
Yep.
what talk to me about so you're going along at ResTech, you kind of kick off marketing for them. You're rising through the ranks, right? So you start sort of as marketing manager, and then you're doing the Southeast, and then you're kind of a director and VP, and you're moving up through these ranks. What was the point at which you said, hey, I feel like I need more formal education here. I feel like I need something that I don't have.
It wasn't necessarily that I felt I needed more education. It was just that I'm interested in education, and I was interested in public health for a long time. I can't pinpoint like where that interest came from. And maybe it's just all of the exposure to the medical world that I found public health really interesting, particularly health promotion and prevention, right? So ResEC was in the reflux space, and reflux is largely a lifestyle disease. Largely, like there's some exceptions to that, but and that's probably where I got interested in just like why is the healthcare system in general not focused on more of like what is the root cause and how can we focus a little bit more there? So I did that and super interested in all of the things, and like my MPH was so much fun. I did a GW and all of the behavior change, every like program development, evaluation, all behavior change focused. But that was 2013 to 2015. So kind of right towards that time frame was when ComB came out and behavioral science in public health started to be kind of the language, right? So yeah, I graduated from that knowing that that's what I loved doing, but digital health wasn't really a thing yet. Virtual jobs weren't really a thing yet. And at the time I had moved to College Station, Texas. And my options for a public health job was like the county health department. And I was like,
Mm,
we're just not interested in that. Right.
yeah.
So I just stayed put for a while. And I found many ways to apply that within the work I was doing, and it was obviously really helpful. That helped me just gain more respect among physicians, having a master in public health. And yeah, so
Did you start to use, I mean, so you go and get this wonderful, appreciation of sort of systemic change in public health, et cetera, but you're still at ResTech. How are you bringing this into sort of your daily, like, are there two halves of your mind and you're just putting on the hat that's ResTech and trying to buckle down? Or are you starting to talk to ResTech about like, hey, maybe we could get more involved in the behavior change part of this?
yeah, so first way that it came in, well, multiple ways. So one was just really like ramping up our training for our internal folks and our sales team. So I did a lot there with kind of distilling studies and explaining like, what do these studies mean? What do all these statistics mean? And helping them turn that into language that they can use when they're selling or educating new accounts, things like that. And then it also helped a ton to understand more about behavior change. So from a physician point of view, right, we're asking you to take this new diagnostic device and completely change how you're approaching reflux in your practice. Total shift in their day, right? They don't have time for shifts in their day. So that was one thing. And it was really helpful there to just like understand how to dig in, how to get to their pain points, and how to kind of solve that problem for them or frame it in different ways and get them to adopt a whole new procedure, right? And then on the patient side, patients are used to, like, live in a very like pill happy world, especially in America. And they usually go in and they have these complaints and they get these pills. Instead of just getting pills, we're going to ask you to put a tube in your nose and it hangs down into your throat and just leave it there for 24 hours. Okay. Like, most people are like, no, I'll take the
I'll
pills.
pass.
Right. And so, figuring out through a lot of like trial and error and observation and talking to patients, figuring out like what are the best ways to present this and get them to try it, right? Instead of just trying the pills. So all of those different ways are kind of the majority of how I applied what I learned in my MPH, and how, you think about changing behavior and kind of program-ish. And
And
then
did
after
you did you find a receptive internal audience, or was this a thing that you feel like, hey, I'm like having to convince people and sell this idea of behavior change internally?
internally, it was easy because I was in charge of marketing. So that was easy to like get in there. And I was out in the field all the time too. So it was kind of like I was just doing it. And there were so few of us wearing so many hats that I didn't have layers of people to go through. And, so I found
So,
stuff that worked.
so the combination of small plus power meant, I didn't have to do a lot of convincing. I was already been there for, 10 years. I was well respected. Right.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and when I was in sales, I basically had the eastern half of the country, and I always had really good numbers. And anytime we had sales meetings and we had to role play or do typical sales stuff, I was like, nope, not gonna do it. I can't role play because that's not how I sell things. I
Right.
can't do it. Right. It's
We're
all,
selling things programmatically over here in my
yeah,
section. Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I would opt out of all of that stuff. And I guess it was always okay because I was doing well with what I was doing was working. So
100%, right? Like nothing wins like success, right? Nothing is as convincing. But there is something to be said. I think sometimes junior behavioral scientists, it's hard because they go into a business and they're like, well, if science says something right, people should just logically do it. And there's something to be said for staying around a place for 15 years and getting enough power that, like, even when the science, you don't have to rely only on the science. You can also rely on your own credibility and your own relationships and your own success. You have enough momentum to start building some of the science behind, right?
yeah.
You don't have to go in saying, I'm the head of behavioral science. You can say, I'm just successful at the thing that I do. And then you can be like, surprise, it was behavioral science the whole time.
Yeah. And I didn't even really know, like, since I didn't have that language yet, all
Right.
I knew was like my marketing background and what I knew worked for marketing, and then add on this public health stuff that I had learned and like what works in programs and how can I kind of apply that, even though this isn't a program, how do I kind of apply what we know about human behavior change to these things that we're doing?
And so you're at ResTech for a long time, 15 years. And then 2020 rolls around and you call it pivot. But it does, this does seem to be the era where you start to say more consciously, like, I am a behavioral scientist. I'm focusing on the behavior change. That's one where I want to spend more of my time, right? Less of my time being executive, more of my time doing behavior change work. Talk to me about that trend. Like, was that conscious? Did it just sort of happen? Like, talk to me about that transition.
So I was, if you're at a company for a really long time, like at least this was my experience, there's many years where you're like kind of done, but you don't really know what's next. And I started to have kids during that time. And at the time, it was kind of this like, well, this is easy. I could do this job in my sleep, and I have kids, and I'm pretty much always asleep because I have young kids. Like even when I'm awake, I'm not actually there. So I stuck around a while, and then I did health coach training through Duke Integrative Medicine. And I didn't
But
even
wait, pause. Because, like, you didn't wake up one morning and be like, Duke, like, what happened that you were like, hey, I want to do health coach training?
Yeah. Okay. So what's so interesting here, where I feel like it's just the universe like weaving this whole thing for me, because so much of this is like happenstance, and I didn't actually know what I was doing until I'm like deep into it. So, um, there's IIN, which is Institute for Integrative Nutrition, which I had kind of heard about for years, and that kind of put this idea of like health coaching on the map for me. And then one day I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. But what else is out there? This can't be the only school, right? And then I found Duke and was like, oh, of course I'm going to do it through Duke. And because health coaching is kind of a new thing, I want at least like that credibility of the Duke name, right? So I start my program thinking it's going to be all about like nutrition and helping people live a healthier lifestyle and all these things. And I'm like, a month into the program, like, what are we doing? We're like reflecting back what people are saying and like asking these questions. And it's all kind of motivational interviewing type stuff that at the time I was like, what is this? And then it kind of all came together. And that was this whole element of behavior change. And one of my first chats with Casey Hughes, she was like, it's so great, because she's a coach too. She's like, health coaching is like a front row seat to behavior change. And I was like, yes, it totally is. And so I loved that. And I loved that it was just so different than what I thought I signed up for. But the whole process is so interesting, and like taking people through behavior change and like designing it for them and understanding their individual barriers, which it's all very similar. And I mean, really the same thing, except you have like an N of one, right? You have this one person, which on one hand, it's a lot easier because you can get very specific with them. But on the other hand, if you have a bigger population, like it's a little bit easier to get some success in some big portion of that
Yeah,
population.
probabilistically, right?
Right.
It's very hard to do deterministic behavior change.
Yeah.
It's much more easy to do probabilistic behavior
Yep.
change.
Yep.
Right.
So that got me this kind of like different angle on behavior change. So from there, I was like, I'm ready to go. I'm gonna have to like, I want to get some experience. And the way to do that is to just get a job kind of at the entry level
Doing
place.
health coaching. And
Yep.
and what was it like going from sort of like VP of marketing, this very important executive role, to like, and now I'm a health coach at Teladoc?
It was so hard. It was interesting because like the culture was night and day. It was Livongo right before they were acquired by Teladoc. Very interesting, supportive culture. People were always on a treadmill or a bike or whatever during a meeting, and it was just like it was great. But it was like, it took me about a week to get the hang of things, and then I just felt like for 6 months I beat my head against the wall. Because it was just very repetitive work. And I was like, okay, I've gotten the experience. This company's great, but like I can't like I've been in an entry level role for 6 months now. And meanwhile, my mom was dying, and I was working 9-hour shifts Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And I had a 3 and a 5-year-old. Like
Just
it just
unsustainable.
didn't work. It didn't work for me.
And I
So
think I think it's also hard, given your sociological roots, given your interest in sort of public health and sort of larger health. It is hard to go to individual behavior change because you're like, you have 20 clients and you're like, your problems are all the same problem. Yes, you're individual people. Yes, you're all unique, special snowflakes. Sure. But like, you are all from the same cloud, my friend. Right. And if you have that sort of population level bent, it can be tough sometimes, I think, for people when they go back to the individual to not feel like, oh man, like a programmatic thing would really help a lot of you.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And then that's kind of why my next step was kind of a hybrid of the two. So another startup, which like startups are just where I love startups. They're just my favorite.
Talk,
Um,
talk to me about that. To double click
yeah,
on that for a second.
yeah.
What is it about startups that you think, you've had a lot of success in startups? Talk to me about like why that atmosphere is conducive for the work that you want to do.
Yeah. I probably couldn't have told you why until I worked for Cigna and had the opposite experience to understand like what is it actually like in a giant enterprise. In a startup, you can get your hands into everything. You can talk to everyone. I'm talking like when there's 20 to 40 people in a company, like you know everybody. And even if you're not doing engineering, you can talk to the engineers and understand what they're doing, and they can learn from you. It just like the reciprocal kind of learning all the way around the whole company, I think is really helpful and beneficial to help everybody like march towards the same goal and understand just different layers that at a larger company, people are so siloed that they're like, you might all start with the same, yeah, this is what we're doing, right? And then there's this huge alignment drift that you talk a lot about it. Um, and there's also, maybe it's not like this everywhere, but it feels like there's a lot of like, don't step on this person's toes, or this team owns this. You like be really careful about that. And we're just trying to get the work done. Like,
Right.
does it matter? So I found that really challenging, was like, just knowing the pace of it is like a huge thing. I have to work very quickly. I talk very quickly, which I'm like consciously trying to not
You're
right now.
doing great, Bree. Don't worry.
And so I think just the pace of it, and the, if you understand 360 what's happening, it helps so much in whatever your role is. So I think that's why I like startups.
And so in going from Livongo, which went into Teladoc and became part of this much bigger thing, you go off to Well Links, right? And you're back in that startup environment. And this is a nice sort of, as you said, hybrid role, right? You're a little bit in that individual behavior change coaching piece, but you also have a much more programmatic, because you're sort of the coaching lead, you have a much more programmatic approach here.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so they had, for a couple years before I joined, they had started with a series of connected devices. So they had like a spirometer and a pulse ox and like these connected devices for COPD and an app. And then they were advertising coaching. And it was funny because in my interview, he was like, yeah, we don't have coaching. We need coaching. And I was like, oh, okay. So that's what I'm coming on for. So I was the first, like, closest thing to a clinician, and I'm not a clinician, that joined the team. It was all, commercial folks and engineering, basically product. So I came on and did what's in my scope of practice, which is behavior change. Like that's what a coach can do. And I built a coaching team and built a lifestyle management program that would go along with and support what the data was being collected from the connected devices. So based on just that, we did a big study with COPD Foundation, and like just the lifestyle changes alone in this population were leading to like really great change in their metrics, which there's not a whole lot of big change you can make in COPD metrics, really. Like you can't really improve the disease, but you can improve kind of a lot about their activity level and things that people are able to do. So much mental health in that space where people had so much anxiety, or they had gotten a lot of gotten really depressed after the pandemic, and like too much anxiety to go out, or depressed because they haven't left their room in literally 4 years or whatever it was. And yeah, so I developed that program, the coaches, and then we started getting clinicians. So we got respiratory therapist, and then it turned into kind of, physician, chief medical officer. And we kind of shifted a little bit our focus on really heavily on patient activation, which is this idea for people that don't know. There's kind of this spectrum of I am in charge of my health. What I do matters. I have ownership, all the way to the other side is like, nothing I do matters. The doctor is in charge of my health.
Right. I just
And
do what the
so,
doctor says. They medicate
yep,
me or whatever it is they do, and then that's that.
yep. So a lot of it was working on, identifying where are the patients when they come to us on this spectrum, and how do we get them more on this side of like, I have some ownership over my health. Like the doctor is my guide and diagnoses and tells me, what I can do. But ultimately I have to do these things and I have to move, I have to take my meds, I have to do these things in order to get better. So that was
And so as you build, you're building out this coaching team,
Mhm.
you're now more conscious of yourself as explicitly about behavior change. What did you look for in your coaches? What do you look for as you're building this team in terms of like, who do you think is going to be good at creating this sort of behavior change efforts?
Yeah. That was an interesting process for me, like interviewing coaches, because we kind of had to put in a mock coaching session, and I don't like mock anything. Like it's just so hard. But I was really looking for people who are just really personable and just warm, and people that seemed like they could have just like a real honest conversation. They knew kind of how to ask those probing questions, like they knew motivational interviewing. In this case, it really helped to know a little bit more about like the health side of things, which all health coaches do, right? But some have other backgrounds, like they have a respiratory therapy background and they're a coach, for example.
Right.
But really just knowing the coaching process, knowing that, you're identifying like what is this person's like big pipe dream? Like what is really holding them back? What would they really like to do in life? Because it's probably not, I would really like to be able to walk around the block. It's more like I would like to be able to get down on the ground and play with my grandchildren, right? And figuring out that motivator gives you something to anchor to. So the people that just can really navigate the process in a natural way and get people to open up to them, really.
And did you find those coaches were sort of implicit in that, meaning, they happen to be good and personable, et cetera, or were they explicit about that? Hey, I have a sort of like, there is a notion of a promoting pressure and inhibiting pressure, and I'm pulling those out and I'm focused on that. You talked about motivational interviewing, which is some of the formalization of some of this. Did you
Mhm.
find better coaches in the sort of formal space or in the sort of informal space?
Well, they all had training in that. So whether like how it was developed in them, whether it was implicit or like learned, I don't really know. But I guess the best answer I can give is just like who felt like they were doing it more naturally, whether it like came naturally or they were doing what they had been taught.
Whether they were performing or not, it felt natural. It's right. It doesn't
Yeah,
feel like they're reading off a checklist, right? Like this
totally.
feels like a conversation, not an interview.
Totally. And on that note, that was one of the biggest challenges was taking an actual protocol. And it's
Right.
something I had to like figure out at Livongo when I was working with one of the psychologists there on developing a mental health coaching program, was like reconciling this idea of a protocol versus coaching, which is the opposite of a protocol,
Right.
and trying to figure out how do you put the two together. So when I was at Wellings, I'm like, okay, I've done this before. I can take this like protocol. Here's what you need to do for a COPD patient. These are things that have to happen. But how do you like implement that, put it in a program that helps it unfold in the way that that particular individual wants it to, they're receptive to doing X, Y, and Z, but not B and A yet.
Yeah, this is always the hard bit of psychology, right? As a science, we need rigor and regulation in order to be able to look at something across people. So I need Bree to answer the same survey questions that Matt answers in order to be able to look across those two people.
Yeah.
And yet, Bree and Matt's sort of, it's funny. I was filling out some diagnostic questionnaires the other day, and I was talking with my co-parent about them, and I was like, I don't know that I think these predict anything, right? Like just because of the clinical way that they're phrased and the need to sort of regularize them has extracted all of the sort of personality and humanness and warmth and I'm not sure how predictive I really think these are. At the same time, like I'm a scientist and I know they're predictive, but man, do they
Yeah.
feel weird.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah.
And so you're at Well Links, you're like building this coaching team. Why Cigna? Like why the transition to something bigger? And this is your first like a formal applied behavioral, you are like taken on the mantle at Cigna, which obviously I love, but like, tell me about that transition.
Yeah. So things were like up and rolling with Welllinks and I like a fast pace. Like I spent a few months kind of like, okay, what's next? Like I built all this, everything's good. Now what?
Right.
And like waiting. So I was getting a little stir crazy and it takes a long time for these digital health companies to get contracts. Just takes forever. And I was just I had gotten this language about behavioral science and had really like dove into it over the last couple of years. And I was like, I'm just going to start looking for those kind of jobs. Like, I want that. I want something with that title now. So
Mhm.
I applied to a bunch of stuff. This role at Signal being one, clinical program development. Like, it was the longest title ever. Like, senior advisor, clinical program development, applied behavioral science, or something like that. I was like, geez. So I applied, totally forgot I applied because I was like, I'm never going to get this job, whatever. And
Wait. Tell me about that. Why did you think? Because there are other more experienced behavioral scientists who are using this formal language, and I don't have enough sort of background in it
probably,
because Cigna's going to
yeah.
look at me and not have big company experience. Like, what is telling you like this isn't going to work?
Probably all of those things. And without going on too much of a tangent, this is what spoke to me a lot from the James
Kidding
Healy.
me? This is an N of one, man. Tangents are what we're all about.
Okay, so something that James Healy said in his interview with you was like, they're, conforming to this one thing where oftentimes like that role is filled, that job is being done. There's often the opportunity in like the gray area or the space in between. And that is something I grappled with for so many years, thinking like, my background is all over the place. Like I've done this and this and this and this. And I saw an article one day about like I-shaped people and T-shaped people and M-shaped people. And I was like, okay, here's something, right? I'm like a double M, I feel like. And so I it wasn't until recently that I like looked back and saw this thread starting from design where like it's all related and it's all about changing behavior.
But it doesn't feel that way in the moment. For you, it felt chaotic. But as
Yeah.
you zoomed out and looked back, you're like, oh yeah, like clearly
Yeah.
this thread.
Yeah. So it was just all of that, right? And so because of that, maybe it's like when my resume is read by the machines, like these machines don't know these things, right? And it's looking for something very specific. Anyway, turns out I was like the needle in the haystack they were looking for in like 380 applications or whatever. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. Like, whatever.
Good. So,
Yeah. So, yeah, they were starting a lot in the digital health kind of space within Cigna and kind of they have this big Evernorth arm and some of these big projects, they were starting to realize like, okay, we really need behavioral science. And the manager who created this position like knew a lot about design thinking and had kind of learned about behavioral science. And she's like, is what we need. And with my kind of healthcare background and program development experience, that was what like it seemed really great. So
you
yeah.
talked about the challenge of going from a small startup to a really big company, which can, I went from my second startup to Microsoft. Uh,
Mhm.
Talk to me about that transition into something big. What worked well? What did you feel good about? What did you like about Cigna as a big place? Like, what did you benefit from? And then where were their challenges?
Okay, so the benefits, really like there's just deep pockets, right? And there's all kinds of resources everywhere you look. You can do trainings on this, that, or the other, and um, there, like you just have all sorts of support. But what was really challenging was like you're in your place and like that is where you belong and like there are these clear boundaries and my whole career I've been like boundaryless. Right, I have my responsibilities but I've always been happy to like jump in and help with things all over the place. Like when I worked in an office I would want to like this wasn't really helpful to the engineers but I would get bored and be like, can I solder some stuff for a while? And like I didn't know what I was doing but things like that where you can just jump in and do whatever. um and if there's problems to be solved you can like grab them and take ownership and just knock it out, right? you can't do that at a large organization. It's a lot of like, okay, present to this group 3 weeks from now and like get their buy-in. And then like it's just like all these like little steps and steps and steps. And I just found that really frustrating. A lot of people like that process and kind of the politics and the all the things, but I see a problem and I want to fix it. And it's it's hard when you can't.
Yeah, I love the book For Whom the Bell Tolls, right, by Hemingway, which is in, obviously there's a very personal love story and there's all sorts of stuff going on, but the sort of macro story is this thing, right? It's like, we've actually decided we don't need to blow up this bridge that is actually going to result in the death of the main character. But like, it takes so long for that decision to get made and that decision to get communicated to the front that they're like, if already died blowing up the bridge, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
And there's,
Exactly.
it's an inevitable consequence of scale. It's interesting that the Amazon CEO came out recently and said, we want to be the world's biggest startup. And I think there's a fine balance there, right? Like, if everybody's just doing startup-y things in their own chaotic way, I'm not sure that you can make an organized system like Amazon that delivers packages everywhere all the time, right?
Nope. And there are people like it, I think to scale that large, like there are a lot of people who that's how they work. They need their specific job and they want to do their specific job really well. And that's great. That's just a different kind of person than I am. Like I don't do well like that.
You're a free radical. We talk a lot about,
Oh,
like, there are these lovely molecules that are doing what they're supposed to do, and then there are these free radicals. And, behavioral scientists, I think,
yeah.
we talk a lot about the behavioral focus, but the second word is change, right?
Yeah.
Like, behavioral science doesn't really exist in static systems, right? It only exists when you want something to be different than it already is.
Yeah.
And so that could create a lot of sort of, interesting tensions. So you lasted almost 2 years at Cigna in the machine,
Yeah.
but then ultimately bowed out. I think, it sounds like for some of the same reasons that you love startups. You sort of tried the big machine and figured out, hey, the pace that I'm going to have to work at here is not sustainable for me. I always
Right.
joke that I had hair before I went to Microsoft, right? And I pulled
I
it
know
all out.
I have like 2 gray hairs now, so I still have all my hair, but like the little gray ones are I'm like, no, if I hide them,
Those are the
it's
Cigna
gray.
grays.
But there was a lot of fun stuff. I got to somehow I became the go-to like on-site 2-day strategy session leader. And like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I guess I was good at it. And it was super fun to like take them through like, what is your strategy? And like identifying the strategy and start to tie that at least to behaviors and get them to kind of like think in this different way. So I thought that was super fun. But yeah, ultimately I can't work at that pace. It's just it's interesting how stressful it can be to be working too slow, right?
Yeah.
You have different expectations of yourself and you need to do more. And when you're not doing more, it's just really anxiety provoking.
When I was a kid in 8th grade, it was the first time I ever took a stress inventory. And one of the line items was parents fighting more. And I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. If my parents were fighting more, I can understand why I would be stressed out about this. And the very next item was parents fighting less. And I was like, that feels weird. But then when you think about it, if your parents fought all the time and all of a sudden they just stopped fighting, you'd be like, oh shit, right? Like, it's like when you're in the jungle and all of a sudden the noise goes away and you're like,
Like the calm before the storm.
yeah, this is a bad sign. All the animals shut up. Like,
Yeah.
probably something bad's about to happen right now. I think it's very, very easy to imagine why being forced to go faster than you are comfortable could be stressful, right? We as humans could understand why, if somebody was cracking the whip behind me and I had to go faster than I wanted to be going, that would be stressful. But it is equally stressful to us I grew up with horses. If a horse wants to run and you're constantly reining it back, that horse don't like it, right? Like the horse is like, I want to run. Like, I'm trying to go fast here, man. Like, why are we walking? Like, let's go. And I could totally see why that's, where that would be frustrating. Now, for me, at least at Microsoft, I had these sort of steam valves. So I've talked about the importance of side projects, right? And I'm like, I had these other things that I could do while I was waiting for the main, while the main people were taking an extra 6 months to make a decision, I'd be off over here doing shit over here and shit over here, keep myself busy,
Yeah.
right? To your point, I'm just going in there and soldering shit because I'm like, oh, I'll do just the soldering thing.
Yeah.
So you're out. Do you think you'll ever go back to big? You think you'd go back to something small? You think you want to keep consulting, right? Because you're doing some health coaching, some consulting, right? So that straddles
Yeah.
nicely the sort of like individual N of one stuff and also the population level stuff. Are you happy in that balance?
Yeah, for now. And as I kind of progress, we'll see how the balance is maintained. I do love both ends. Like I love the one-on-one coaching and group coaching. I also love just program design. I think it's so much fun to figure out like how do we get this whole population with this similar problem to make changes in the right direction when they all might have different barriers and we have to design around those barriers that could be pretty broad, right? And how do we bring in like what we know as clinical evidence to these programs? So yeah, for now, I like the combination because it just keeps my brain really busy. And
Mhm.
that's what I've learned about myself is I just have to be busy. And it's probably some sort of disorder I have. But that's okay.
It's okay. We're working through it. We got a
Yeah.
coach for you. Uh, no,
Yeah.
but it's true. Humans are defined through competing pressures. And you have this competing pressure that is, I really love working individually with people. And I really love working at a structural piece. And it may be that, you end up doing more of one or the other in your sort of main career, but you'll probably, it sounds like, always be doing a bit of both,
Yeah.
kind of going forward. Although you do have kids, so you got lots of individual coaching now and in the future.
Totally. And yeah, I feel blessed. I'm at a point where like they can be my number one and I can work around what they need right now. Because, ultimately on my deathbed, I'm not going to care what I did for work, really. So
But
yeah.
I will care because you've done amazing work and you've had this great and wonderful career. And I can't wait to see, where this continues to go for you. I think there's so many wonderful, talented, very senior applied behavioral scientists available as very senior consultants right now, which is really good and healthy for the field, right? We
Yeah.
need people internally. We need people to lead these teams. Obviously, at BeSci.io, that's the kind of stuff I work on. But in the same dynamic tension sort of way, it can't always be an internal team. It can't always be upskilling the people that you have or hiring in new people. Sometimes it needs to be these great outside experts doing sort of wonderful stuff.
Yep.
Is there what are you excited about in the direction that the field of behavioral science is taking, right? Like what do you see as like promising and good about the direction we're taking? Because you've grown with us, right? Like you sort of that early 2000s era, which is when I think a lot of the sort of old guard of behavioral science got started. I'm counting myself as old guard here, old only in the sense that, roughly my age. We've seen the field develop, right? Even the words applied behavioral scientists, right, are developments. Where's it going? What do you like? Do you have concerns?
I don't know that I have concerns. Oh my focus, don't disturb this one off. I'm excited about it because I think so many people are more and more interested in it, whether or not they fully understand what's happening or how design something strategically or not. I think they're starting to see that it works. And what I'm really excited about too is this shift away from just the like sprinkling on top of like, we know that this bias and this bias and this bias exists. Like, let's redesign your website with that. Well, like that's one of my biggest frustrations with behavioral science is like, that isn't really strategic. That is just like a huge generalization. And sure, it might help, but like, do you really want to dive in and figure out a good strategy here and what you're trying to do? So I think we're moving a little bit away from that, which is exciting. And there's really this like kind of meshing of social psychology and public health. And I think as the two come together more and more and kind of use each other's learnings, it'll just get that much better.
And you're really living at that nexus. You talked about it earlier when you were hiring coaches, right? Even if you don't really understand what you mean, but there are lots of executives that bring in BeSci.io that are excited but have no idea what they're actually hiring. But they're
Yeah.
excited. And it turns out if you're excited enough, then it buys you the space to then teach them the stuff that they need to know to actually do it, to actually formalize it, to actually build that strategy. If a coach is personable enough to be able to get your trust and attention, then there's time to follow behind with the behavior change,
Yep.
right? Whereas like, if there's no promoting pressure, you move the inhibiting pressures as low as you want, but if people don't want to do it in the first place, it doesn't take us anywhere.
Yep. Yep.
Well, Bree, thanks for spending time with me. It's always so much
Yeah.
fun when we get to chat. I'm so excited about this next chapter of what's going on for you. And thank you for sharing your story with folks on an N of one, because I think, again, while there are themes that we see across people, right? Like, and there are reasons we're all friends, you and me and Claire and Steph and all of, we're all friends for a reason. At the same time, each person's individual story is very different. And I appreciate that and like that. And,
Yeah.
and like and appreciate you and love you very much. And congratulations on this next thing. And I'm looking forward to seeing how it develops.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great. Yeah.
Thanks, Bree.
All right. Bye.